I am very, very excited to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Costa Samaras. Costa is a professor of civil and environmental engineering here at CMU, and he spent the last 3 years in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP as the cool people say it, serving as Principal Assistant Director for Energy and OSTP Chief Advisor for the Clean Energy Transition. Costa recently returned from public service this year to serve as the next director of the Scott Institute, and for this reason, we could not be happier to have him back at CMU. So Costa, the stage is yours.
All right, welcome to Energy Week. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much to Daniel and our amazing team in the Scott Institute and our Associate Director, Valerie Karplus, and all of you for the leadership in energy in this region. We are very, very excited to welcome you here to Energy Week. With your help, the Scott Institute is going to do a couple things. First, we're going to raise the visibility of the Institute both on campus, in our region, and nationally as one of the leading energy institutes working on decarbonization. We're also going to grow and accelerate research and entrepreneurship for net zero emissions at Carnegie Mellon and beyond. There is no reason why Pittsburgh should not be the clean tech capital of the world. And we're also going to expand resources and opportunities available to all folks at Carnegie Mellon working on clean energy and decarbonization. So as Daniel said, I just returned from 2.5 years. I appreciate the extra extension. 2.5 years in the White House. I was lucky to work with amazing colleagues on a whole array of topics on clean energy and decarbonization, mostly on aligning our public and private clean energy innovation ecosystem to get us all the way to net zero. But I got to work on AI and transportation and decarbonization of the electricity sector, fusion and nuclear power, the energy use of crypto, and a lot more. But I know what you're thinking when you see this picture of me. So this is the Rose Garden with the Oval Office in the background, and you're thinking, does this guy own any other ties besides that one? And the answer is yes. I have one more, and you'll see it tomorrow at Energy Week. We know that carbon pollution, which is primarily resulting from our burning of fossil fuels, is what's causing climate change. So 1 metric ton, we hear about tons a lot today, 1 metric ton of carbon pollution is about the same as one might generate if you drove an average car across the country. And so the US produces about 6.4 billion tons of carbon pollution per year. And then once you take out a bunch of the land use emissions that sink some of that carbon, we produce about 5.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. These emissions are generated from every sector of the economy. And in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we're going to have to get all of these emissions down to zero, or to net zero. Well, the good news is that President Biden rejoined the Paris climate agreements on the first day of his administration and made a commitment for the United States to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030, and to get to a net zero emissions economy no later than 2050. And emissions are already 17% below 2005 levels. But we have a long way to go. Now we have to get all the way to net zero emissions, and we're going to do this by pulling clean technology to the market with policy measures that accelerate deployment, demonstrate and deploy technologies that are not yet at commercial scale. We need to do early stage R&D and prototyping to make sure that there's a portfolio of game-changing innovations that ensure an adequate suite of technologies to get us all the way down to zero. And while there's a lot more to do, I think that there's something that we should take away from and take stock of how far that we've come. You know, a lot of us in this room and in this broader climate community and at Carnegie Mellon have been working on climate solutions for a long time. And there was always these good ideas. It was like, we should electrify the post office vehicles. We should have clean buses. We should have, make sure that people can buy used electric vehicles, not just new electric vehicles. And a lot of the things that we wanted to do, a lot of the things that you wanted to do, got done in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And so it's important that we take stock of that. It's important that we celebrate that, and then now it's time to get back to work. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is about demonstrating and building clean tech. The the theme for this year's Energy Week is obviously transportation. So again, it's easy to get lost in all the bullet points and all the programs that get announced of here's what's happening, but just a sample of the stuff that we wanted to try to do in transportation that got done in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is building out a national network of 500,000 EV charging stations, the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak, including a bunch of high-speed rail stuff that we've wanted forever. $10 billion for electrifying transit and school buses, and then funding for safe streets for biking and walking and rolling and active transportation. So then there's the Inflation Reduction Act. This is the largest climate bill in history. This is really catalytic to where we're going in our clean energy transition. This has major investments from the Department into the Department of Energy's loan program to provide a bridge to bankability. It has EV tax credits that you get right away, right at the dealership. And it also has EV incentives for folks to buy used EVs, as we talked about. The e-bike credit did not make it in, but I think that that needs to be job number one of the next climate policy. But the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act also has green infrastructure to cool down cities and advance environmental justice. It's got $3 billion just to electrify ports, and that is going to reduce pollution that people are breathing in, causing heart attacks and causing asthma. And that's just one little thing in this giant bill. It also has nearly $10 billion to electrify the post office vehicles and $27 billion for a greenhouse gas reduction fund that will deliver lower clean energy costs and economic revitalization for communities that have been overburdened with pollution. All in all, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act will double the amount of emissions reductions that we had before, and will double the amount of clean energy, clean electricity that we had before by 2030. You can track the more than $600 billion in private sector announcements in investment on invest.gov. So basically, before this administration, we had zero chance of meeting a 2030 climate goal, zero. And now, thanks to this legislation and these actions, we are within sight of achieving our 2030 climate goal. We have to again, let's celebrate that. We're getting close to between 33 and 41% below 2005 levels in 2030. These two bills alone will reduce GHG emissions by 1 billion tons. Again, not enough, but quite a lot. Now it's time to, now it's time to get back to work. We need continuous innovation to drive the types of technologies, the game-changing technologies that we'll need to be deploying in the 2030s and 2040s. We need to make technology, clean technology, cheaper, faster, better, equitable, and deployable and scalable. All of these can happen with continuous deployment and innovation. You know, one of my jobs at the White House with our team was to understand where every ton of greenhouse gas emissions was in the economy, what to do about it, how mature are the technologies that we have to address these, how much we're spending on those technologies, and how do we kickstart and jumpstart an innovation ecosystem across the United States to do that. So now we have to think about some of the things that we need to ramp up in our federal policy to get us all the way to net zero. And I'm gonna mention just a few of these things at a high level, but they really tie together a lot of the themes that we've already heard today in our transportation theme of Energy Week. So between now and 2030, we're electrifying lots of our homes and our transportation sector and our businesses, and we might need up to 200 gigawatts of peak to meet 200 gigawatts of peak load by the end of the decade. But we also have all of these new distributed energy resources that we're deploying. Behind the meter storage, solar panels, connected vehicles, connected appliances, all kinds of distributed energy resources that can be aggregated together as a virtual power plant and reduce the amount of demand and act as a flexible resource for the grid. And when you have that, you don't need to go out and build lots of new expensive plants to meet your expensive peak. So we need virtual power plants for America. You know, electrification of the things that we're talking about, the things that we want. We want electrification because we can power our homes and our businesses and our transportation system with clean electricity. These all run through the interstate highway system of wires that connect generators, our transmission system, and our distribution system. This system was built for last century's uses and last century's climate. And we need a Grid New Deal to reinvest in every aspect of the electricity system in the United States to make it equitable, to make it cheap, and to make it durable under increasing climate impacts, and also so that we can use this as the highway system that is going to drive a lot of our decarbonization plans. Being in Pittsburgh, obviously we care about our industrial heritage and our industrial future. And there are lots of opportunities in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act for decarbonizing industry. But the next set of climate policy will have to go further. The use of and generation of clean heat is essential to decarbonizing our industry. And it has to, again, be cheap, clean, durable, and available. And there are opportunities to do a clean heat production tax credit, or clean heat demonstration projects, or clean industrial build out of our chemicals and materials and cement and all the things that we need to function and to decarbonize the rest of the economy. We're going to have to decarbonize the industrial sector at the same time. So we heard today about moving goods and moving freight. There are lots of opportunities for reducing demand and doing deliveries with alternative methods, but we also need a fleet, again, clean, cheap, reliable, and available and equitable medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And this comes from not just the vehicle technology, but it's the infrastructure for charging and refueling, the deployment, the financing, the use, and the capitalization of all of this giant piece of American infrastructure that we are just starting to scratch the surface on. So we need clean delivery. You know, one thing that we all use every day, but we might not think about in a climate context, is we need clean agriculture. And there are parts of the agriculture system that we've come a long way in reducing greenhouse gas emissions on, but there's still a long way to go. And so we need clean fertilizers, and we need new ways of producing more food on less land for more people in a way that is, again, cheap, equitable, clean, and fast. And there are opportunities in livestock management and soil carbon and new practices and innovation that we need to be going full steam ahead on to reduce these emissions to net zero. You know, this is a transportation theme conference this week, but housing is a transportation policy, and housing is a climate policy, and we need to have housing like the climate matters. And what does that mean? Again, clean, cheap, equitable, affordable, abundant, net zero, smart materials, and in the places where people have leisure and work and recreation and activities where they can reduce the amount of travel that they need to go. Again, we need housing like the climate matters, and that's, again, for the next type of climate policy has to center and expand housing. So obviously, this is what we were talking about this week, enabling moving more while driving less. And so this is opportunities to expand public transit. We do work on EVs here at Carnegie Mellon, and we're very strong on the electrification of the transportation system. And sometimes there's like a tension between electric vehicle, transit, active transportation, and other modes. And what I like to say is we are going to need every single EV that we can get our hands on. And at the end of that, it's not going to be enough. We have to get to that point as well. But we're also going to have to increase the usability, the equity, the accessibility, the frequency, of a clean public transit fleet beyond which I think many folks are even imagining. So it's our job at Carnegie Mellon to reimagine what that future looks like. And we are going to need everything that we can to get our transportation system down to net zero. Again, next Inflation Reduction Act or next bipartisan infrastructure law will need to reimagine and recenter the investments that we're making to ensure that folks can move more while driving less. Again, centered in this area is that climate mitigation and climate resilience were for some reason far apart over the last decade and a half. And now they are firmly and forever linked. Everything that we do has to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the space, as well as increasing resilience in communities, while also avoiding maladaptation and increasing inequities from communities that have been overburdened with pollution, who also suffer disproportionately the impacts of climate change. We can do this. We can have resilient and equitable communities in a way that improves lives for everyone if we're imagining it and we put it into action. And so the last thing here is around digitization and AI. This is a theme that, again, we here at Carnegie Mellon are very well versed in. We are world leaders in this technology, and we are making sure that AI is good for people. That has to be the case. At the same time, we have to make sure that AI is good for the climate. And we need to bake those principles in right now of how the need for an ethical AI system includes climate-safe AI. So Andrew Carnegie, I'll finish with this. Andrew Carnegie famously said that my heart is in the work. And that's kind of the way that we do things here at Carnegie Mellon. We get things done. And I want you all to keep your heart in the work for decarbonization and resilience. Because how we deal with climate change and how we address these challenges in our communities are going to set the stage and set the landscape for everything else in the rest of our lives. Climate change and decarbonization is not a sustainability problem. It's not an environmental problem. It's a challenge for everything. And it's a challenge that I know that we can rise to as a community, as a nation, and as a society, because if we keep our hearts in the work, we're going to get it done. Thank you so much, and I look forward to some conversation.
Thank you, Costa, for that wonderful keynote. Does anybody have any questions? And I also obviously want to prioritize students. So if there are any students in the room who would like to ask the first question, don't be shy. I see Costa's own students in the room. I'm not going to make them or put them on the spot.
Hi, Costa. Chris Sandvig. Good to see you again, and I appreciate everything you had to say here about all of this. Kind of building on what we were talking about on the panel I was on. So much of this is not necessarily about the things, the inanimate objects. So much of this is about the policy, the politics, and the frameworks. And so How do you see the Scott Institute playing that role in bringing the people together to change those things? And I'll use decarbonizing transportation funding as an example of that. We cannot move, if we cannot continue to support a transportation system towards zero emissions if the way we pay for that system is by burning fossil fuels, right? So like, what role is the Scott Center in bringing those together so that those of us on the advocacy side have something to point to and take forward?
Thanks so much. So the question is about the role of policy systems and institutions and not just the actual stuff. Let me start with the reverse of this. We need the actual stuff, right? There's 250 million gasoline-powered light-duty vehicles in this country, and we're selling 1 million a year. We're going to have to sell 2 million next year, and 3 million the year after that, and 4 million the year after that. It's a good rule of thumb. So that requires building the types of the workforce, the factories, the material supply chains, and everything that is required to build stuff we need to get to net zero. Now, technology alone is not going to solve anything, as we've heard today and as we know. And so the question around what can the Scott Institute do? The Scott Institute is a world leader in understanding technology and policy and the intersection of those two things. And we need to continue to grow that type of workforce and that type of systems thinking to make policy and make institutions that center people, but also really understand how the technology matters and what the uncertainties are and how to manage those uncertainties. And so I think that this is something where when everybody is asking for the type of change that is needed, it gets delivered. And I think that is it's important, again, to kind of step back. Now that I'm outside of government, there was a organized effort by the folks who care about climate change to say, this is important. And when that happened, the elected officials reacted and said, let's do what the people who are electing us say it's important. So we need to hold our leaders accountable at all levels, and we need to continue to advocate and design what we want. And so I am excited about what the Scott Institute and Carnegie Mellon can do in that conversation.
Thank you for your presentation. Since you were in politics in DC before, how do you see the policies coming along after this year based on elections? Do you see that the government or having conversations with Republicans, they're going to keep moving forward with more policies regarding climate change or decarbonization in transportation or electrifying or power grids? How do you see that coming?
You know, I think that this administration started a momentum in the clean energy transition that I hope is unstoppable because of the investment in workforce and factories and communities that have often been left behind all over the country will build and is building the type of future where everyone can see themselves in it. That is the optimistic side. The very realist side is that in Washington, D.C., people are policy. Who the president is matters. The president appoints cabinet secretaries. The president appoints staff. Those staff then hire other folks. Those people are implementing the president's policies. And so all of that policy expertise and all of that focus on climate change is really at the pleasure of whoever the president is. And so it's important to understand both the politics side, but also the political economy side to make sure that everyone can see themselves in the clean energy transition no matter who's the president.
All right, I think we have time for one final question. This is a popular table here in the middle.
So when we have to think about, as you said, the people and moving beyond just who's in power at the time, another big lever is obviously the private sector and trade associations and lobbying. And the perception that I've gotten so far is that it's been difficult to change a lot of the current systems we have in place because of the industry lobbies. And I'm just wondering what more we can do to make sure the lobbying happens in favor of the decarbonization pathway.
I think this is about aligning in, again, holding leaders accountable, because sometimes the popular positions are not the right ones. And so you have to have moral positions that we expect from our leaders. But I think aligning the incentives for a clean energy transition and clean energy economy in every community is how to overcome some of those challenges. And so the more than $600 billion of investment that I mentioned in private investment in the clean energy economy and next generation workforce that have already happened, again, set up constituencies of advocates who say, this is helping our community. This factory that's building batteries is helping our community. Right here in West Virginia, where there is a factory that is supported from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so those types of things where the communities are feeling and, again, seeing themselves in climate policy, breathing cleaner air, having breathing room in their monthly budgets because energy costs are cheaper, visibly seeing that their children are riding on a school bus that's not belching out pollution from the tailpipe. These are things, again, having fewer asthma attacks and fewer heart attacks, or the things that are actually really, really important to everybody's lives will, again, hopefully build and sustain the type of long-term durable coalition that's necessary for the clean energy transition.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Costa, for this awesome keynote, and thank you for all the great questions. Please join me in giving Costa a round of applause.
So now it's my great pleasure to introduce a very special fireside chat with two amazing researchers and clean energy champions. We are very, very lucky to have Chelsea Sexton here. Chelsea is an electric transportation industry pioneer with decades of unrivaled experience, from deploying the General Motors EV1 to guiding Vantage Point Capital Partners' early investment in Tesla Motors, skillfully directing an automotive XPRIZE, and co-founding Plug in America, the nation's largest consumer advocacy group for electrified transportation. Chelsea continues to work toward making the movement of people and goods cleaner, safer, and more accessible. She currently works with the U.S. Department of Energy's Loan Program Office, which finances the manufacturing and deployment of large-scale advanced technology, vehicle, and innovative energy projects. She tilts at windmills and as a lifestyle choice and encourages friendly conspiring for good. She's going to have a fireside chat with our esteemed Associate Director of the Scott Institute, Professor Valerie Karplus. Professor Karplus is a professor in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy with international expertise on regional approaches to low-carbon transition, decarbonization of global corporate supply chains, and the integrated design and evaluation of energy, air quality, and climate policies. And I am thrilled and lucky to get to work with Professor Karplus every day and the great team at the Scott Institute to advance decarbonization here on campus and around the country and around the world. So please.